Hey everyone, it's Nolan Wheeler, CEO of SYNQ.
Hey everyone, Matt Valiant here, COO at SYNQ. Excited to be joining you here with Retail Conversations LP Solutions Summit. And SYNQ's doing some really cool stuff in the retail space, and we think we have a different way of looking at the loss problem, the shrink problem. So why don't you talk a little bit about what you're seeing in the market and how we're doing things a bit differently, Nolan?
Yeah, I would say it's been fascinating to watch retail LP over the last 20 years. It's been the locking showcase, and the call button seems to be the only kind of thing out there. And more and more now with investigative tools and pieces out there. We're not police, and we don't have people in our stores that are frontline workers that are investigators. We're merchants. And it's a question of, let's control what we can control. So can we control the police and legislative laws and resources for law enforcement? Probably not. We're waiting a long time for it. Can we control merchandising and operations? We probably can.
Yeah, I think your experience is probably very similar to mine. I mean, everything is locked up. The smallest items, the big expensive items, you can't get anything. And we're driving people to online shopping when they're in store, they're your most profitable customer. They've got the intent to purchase, so why make it so difficult for them?
Yeah, it's a pretty interesting wheel. If you look at the cycle is, the things that are being stolen by organized retail crime are then being pushed to Facebook Marketplace and to Amazon and etc. And the wheel is very cyclical in the sense that we then go to the store wanting to buy razor blades or whatever the case may be, and it's all locked up and there's so much friction and there's not enough staff. So we're actually feeding this really gnarly cycle.
And also no insight into that labor, right? I mean, you can understand your margin on razors or whatever is behind a locking showcase, but how are you factoring in the time spent, the labor to actually get those items? Are you actually making any money on it at the end of the day? And today, most retailers can't tell you that.
Yeah, that's a great point. If we were to ask the leaders in retail from the operational side, how many times did you go and attend to a locking showcase today? There's no data for that. And there's no data to know, was it a successful outcome? Was the process followed? Did they lock up, walk up? Or was there no customer there at the end? There's a real big gap.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I love your story about the general store, right? I mean, that was we started with the general store, everything was behind the counter. Now we put everything on the floor, and now we're starting to go back to that. So how do we think about this, especially in today's world, the technology we have, the investments that have not been made in retail in-store shopping? How do we use that opportunity to solve this problem? And I think we've got some really cool stuff we're doing there.
Yeah, I don't think there's anybody to blame on this entire thing. I mean, I think that the general store, to your point, everything was behind, the counter, even like a can of bean or a can of corn was behind the counter. And I don't think that anybody ever thought that they'd be selling a $3,000 Hilti gun one day. And I don't think that they ever thought about, the social decline that we've seen in terms of society and some of the issues that we're faced with in some of our cities. So, I don't think anybody's to blame here. I think it's just really more of a consideration of, did we go too far? And now is there a moment in time here where it's gotten so bad, both with labor and LP, that we have to kind of rethink this?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the keys there is, how do we remove the emotion from it? I think you've got a formula that's fantastic that takes into account VC and R. So why don't you tell me a little bit more about that and what are you thinking there?
Yeah. So VCR is a derivative of a very long equation that takes into account about 20 different variables that go into there, from pace pack to holding capacity on shelf to truck decant costs, all these variables that go into it. But when you look at the actual equation, the heaviest weighting is on VCR, which is kind of the simplistic look of the formula. And VCR is velocity, cube, and risk. So if it's a low velocity item, i.e. we don't sell very many of them, but we need to maintain that product either due to seasonality or to maintain category, maybe there's some vendor funding in there, that's velocity. Cube is if it's big, right? So we're talking big stuff, patio sets, display only product. Cube could also be related to the ability to display something versus then put it out there. Like an item might be built flat pack furniture that's going to take up more room, a flat pack small, but that stuff is not really designed to be merched on the floor. It's kind of like a big brown box. And then R, which is the most topical conversation that we have today, which is risk. So risk is most commonly discussed today as it's out there because there's an impact from organized retail crime or theft, or it might be risk for other reasons, like it's just dangerous, like it's a hunting knife, or it's something that's regulated in terms of like a pesticide, or something at a veterinary type facilitated store like Tractor Supply, whereby it's like a tranquilizer or something. So those are the three core items that surmise VCR.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when we take those into consideration, I think you mentioned something really fascinating, truck decant, and that's something that we at SYNQ are building tools for those in-store shoppers. So rather than having to wait around, chase someone down for keys, press a 35-year-old analog button that sends a radio notification with no accountability, no data, nothing built into it, we're putting the power in the hands of the most powerful computer in the store, the customer smartphone. So why don't we reciprocate their time, make it easier for them? They're not waiting around for someone, and we can actually now let them shop at a SKU level of these lock-in showcases and really change the operations of that. And I think, one of the big ones, Nolan, you talk about a lot is the truck decant process, because lock-in showcases are warehousing, not retailing, right? You say that all the time, and it's so true. And the minute you think about this in a new way with this SKU level shopping, letting the customer do it, you're not only transforming that experience for them and the profitability of those customers and the data for those customers, you can transform the whole operations of a store. So rather than taking some of those high velocity or low velocity, high cube, high risk items, cycling through, putting them in lock-in showcases, you can now just face that lock-in showcase, let the customer shop what they want. And now your entire process from that pallet arriving on a truck to someone purchasing it at POS is transformed and so much more efficient.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about Endgame stuff, right? This is the Oakland A's Moneyball of baseball applied to retail. This is looking at what's the actual cost from truck decant, so truck arrived at BDR. What's the cost to unload that truck and get it to shelf? And the lock-in showcase, you said it was, it's warehousing. It's 100% true. That's also just a really expensive way to do retail. Period. Regardless of it being warehousing, they're hard to merch. They constrain what your planogram looks like. And so many times you go into a store and it'll be like shaving products, and then it'll be some other totally different category, and it's just like this hodgepodge, because that 4 foot by 4 foot glass showcase, it's like museum piece for retail products. Like we talked about it, like it's like a prison for revenue. It's just a matter of we just stuff stuff in there because we're trying to solve a problem. But again, we're merchants. We can merchandise ourselves out of this, and that's the future of this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, kind of hinted at how we do lock-in showcases, how we think about that. And I think, inherent to all of this and all the other stuff we do on top of lock-in showcases is that it's unschedulable, right? These, the life of a frontline worker is being interrupted from the stuff that you have to do repeatably and this unschedulable task. So, we think about SYNQ as often kind of the Uber of retail, the dispatch, talk about zone defense versus man. So why don't you talk a little bit about some of the other solutions we have around this unschedulable and how they kind of feed into solving these shrink problems via operational improvements?
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, we started this conversation getting right into, what's the most advanced way to be retailing. Part of this is just a matter of, it's just hard to find people in stores. So, there's this is not scary. There's no boogeyman in this entire piece, but we can look at crawling, walking, and running, and, transforming a locking showcase to presentation showcasing. That's running. It's a matter of how do we get your retail consumer, your staff, your store ops and merchandising folks to say, I'm comfortable with this. It really turns down to let's transform and get away from these analog radio call buttons. There's no accountability. There's no data. I mean, you hit that button in a store, you have no idea if someone's going to help you. And frankly, it's frustrating for the staff member because they have no idea who they're supposed to help.
Well, yeah, we had a perfect example. We were shopping, hitting a button, trying to get some help for something that's locked up, and it's an audible, who's that going to? Who's coming? We don't know. Someone doesn't come. Who's that being escalated to? So, I mean, escalations are a big piece of this, right? I mean, you talked about it earlier, getting in front of the problem before it becomes a bad review or a customer that's disenfranchised and goes online. So escalations are key to that, right? And within our platform, all of our solutions within SYNQ's Frontline Hero platform, escalations are automatically built in. So you can now start triaging these requests in a very strategic way. And like you said, getting ahead of that problem, right? Instead of someone waiting 15 minutes for their curbside, that's going to automatically escalate to a manager. And now that person, instead of going and writing a bad review or not using curbside at your store again, you can get ahead of that. You send out a supervisor who's maybe got that next level of training to kind of address that challenge early on.
Yeah, that's a great point. The commonality here is that it's hard to find help. And there's so many things today that we still need to have a physical one-on-one relationship with, that man coverage. Whether it's in C channel and I'm trying to get my gas pump to turn on, or my receipt didn't print. I mean, I've now got to walk into the store, stand in line, talk to somebody, and we're not adding anything to the P&L. There's no margin. It's just margin pressure when we're just helping customers through this. It's as simple as trying to get into a restroom. Go and see someone for a key and all those types of pieces, scanning a QR code and saying, today's code for the washroom is 49683 or whatever it is, right? So it's every single time you think about, I physically need to have a conversation with somebody to quote unquote put the item in the basket. It's way more than just locking showcases.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the big things with help requests, like the way we think about call buttons and replacing them with a digital tool, is it's that accountability, it's that digital footprint and that tracking of it, but it's also providing context of what you actually need help with, right? It's not someone in this 12-foot section of this aisle needs help. It's Matt in this aisle needs help with this drill, right? So it's being able to take that, and that data is huge, and it allows you now to start thinking about, okay, based on those requests that are coming in, what are the commonalities? How do we start to be proactive and address some of those based on the help requests that are coming in? And I think that leads right into the data conversation. And right, AI is huge. Everyone's talking about AI almost as much as they're talking about shrink and organized retail crime. And I think our story around data is extremely powerful.
Yeah, I mean, we just came back from NRF and we went to StorePoint as well. I mean, AI is the big topic of conversation, but it's really only applicable in retail to kind of this hybridized knowledge worker, frontline worker. It's not really appropriate for the frontline worker. And I say that, and I come back to that because there's no data. We don't know how many times we're doing these tasks. We don't know how many people are abandoning locking showcases and they're abandoning an out of stock or a hole, or how long will someone stand at the bakery department because they want to get a cake that says happy birthday, Sarah. Until we start having what I call kind of digital discipline within those pieces, we won't have the data and we won't be able to feed that model.
Yeah, and I mean, that digital discipline is such a great point because we all live our lives that way now. The people in the stores, the people that run the stores, the people shopping these stores, everything is digital. So we need to start mimicking that for not only the customers, but for those frontline associates as well. I mean, they don't go home and sit and play with their radios, right? They're gonna be on their smartphone. So like, let's give them an experience in the store for both sides that mimics how they actually live their lives in a digital fashion and gives customers better help, gives associates a better experience. And you know, that digital discipline is key.
Yeah, and it is really about collecting that data. I mean, I don't even think it's been 20 years since most retail grocers have been scanning out their perishables, right? So before it was a banana box full of stuff, toss it in the bin. And there was a lot of friction there for staff to say, you want me to use this Telzon Motorola handgun and guess how many pounds of cauliflower I'm gonna throw in the bin? It was a challenge, but now it's just like it's unimaginable that we don't do that today. So that digital transformation now also has to look at shrink and unknown shrink from the produce example I just gave. The labor on the P&L, that's the number one line on the P&L in terms of profitability, in terms of margin pressure. That's the most important thing right now, and we have no line of sight to where the labor actually goes.
Yeah, and I mean, the way to do it is by reciprocity is a word you hear us use a lot. It's about providing reciprocity to everyone involved. You can't just say, here's a tool, you have to use it. You're gonna have people circumvent that. What you need to do is build tools that are valuable for people. So it makes their lives easier. It allows them to get better service, better serve their customers. So I think thinking about it in a way that's not, hey, you have to use this QR code, you have to use this digital tool. It's, here's a tool that is so amazing for staff and for customers that everyone's gonna use it. It's a no-brainer.
Yeah, reciprocity is 100% the right thing. I mean, you go into any big box retailer or even C-channel, like any multi-store retailer right now, you're gonna see a bunch of QR codes that don't do really anything. It's, you know, shop more games, and that's just gonna take you to online. It's like, well, I'm a brick-and-mortar shopper, I don't wanna go online. But we have to transform and we have to challenge retailers to say, if you're not providing reciprocity, if you're not doing something that improves, a lot of times what we call it is customer productivity, if we're not improving the productivity of the customer, because time is the ultimate loyalty, then we have to really challenge ourselves to think just because we can do a QR code doesn't mean we should. And when you start to combine, I went to the washroom as a QR code, that got me in faster and my kid's happy and I'm happy. And I was at the locking showcase and that got me through faster. And I went and got my bakery cake with my loved one's name written on it. And I was able to spell it myself and spell it correctly. It wasn't this like kind of paper carbon copy thing that we're still doing in bakery. Once you start to show to your customer, hey, we've invested in technology, we invested in QR codes for you. We're not having you beholden to our app because we're not going to introduce electronic friction to overcome physical friction. Once you start to show the customer the themes of helping customers through that, now all of a sudden the engagement rate of QR codes goes through the roof because it's no longer a gimmick, it's a solve.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And we talked a lot about data in terms of how do we feed some of these LLMs, how do we take one POS transaction log entry for a play-only item to 8, you know, how long did it take to be picked, who, you know, what was bought alongside it, all these data points, right? But, you know, when we think about data, we also have some really good data on how our approach is providing ROI for the retailers. So we want to talk a little bit about some of the numbers we're seeing in terms of productivity and shrink in the stores that SYNQ is deployed.
Yeah, absolutely. We think about, for us, we bucket friction items. And friction items, a cheap shot to think about it just as a locking showcase. A friction item is a locking showcase, a display only product, and out of stock. Yeah. You know, and you know, it comes down to being accountable to the customer. I will often check the online on hands before I drive to a store. And it's not, they got to have more than one because that's either the display model or they're not going to find it and whatnot, right? So it could be an out of stock. It could be the bakery cake. It could be the deli platter. Again, it's anything that you are beholden to a customer service associate to help you do the transaction. So on all those items, you're talking about reducing labor by 2/3. So average amount of time, and this is not even without distraction time. If you're just stocked shelves and you go and help somebody, by the time you do that round trip and you get back to your original task, it takes you 12 minutes. With our platform, it's taking about 3 minutes and 50 seconds. You got to remember that if that person's doing planogram, it might take them another 15 minutes to get back to where they were in planogram because they were doing something that was, you know, they were highly focused on. They knew exactly where they were within plan. So that's 12 minutes is like the best case scenario. And then you look at shrink reductions that we're seeing in stores. We were at Interact and we were talking about organized retail crime. The stores that run our programs of discipline, they don't have organized retail crime. I mean, maybe you can speak to why they don't have organized retail crime.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about ROI. I mean, it comes down to ROI for them too, right? If we are rethinking how we do these stores, how we merchandise them, how we allow customers to get products, first of all, there's no incentive for organized retail crime to go in, because everything that is now, that they could maybe grab out of a shelf is now in a warehouse. So that not only changes the complexity of what they're trying to achieve, it changes the risk profile. It's the example you gave about stealing something off a retail floor versus going into a warehouse and stealing it. That takes it from a misdemeanor to a felony, right?
Yeah,
that is a
you're
big
talking misdemeanor shoplifting to felony burglary.
Yeah, and that's a big disincentive for organized retail crime.
And you did that because of merchandising.
Yeah.
Right. So I mean, it really does come back to, it's easy to blame and point the finger. We really have to start challenging ourselves as an industry to say, can't arrest ourselves out of this, but we can merchandise ourselves out of this.
Yeah, we sure can. And let's give tools to customers that make their life easier and stop driving them to the online alternatives. Because brick and mortar is always going to have a place, and it provides a powerful experience for customers. And like I said earlier, when they're there, the intent is very high. So let's not let them walk out the door and order it online, right? Let's capture that with providing them something that is going to save them time, make their trip that much better.
Right on. So, I mean, we said a lot.
Yeah.
But what's your takeaways from this conversation?
My biggest takeaway is that we need to shift how we think about loss and how we think about addressing shrink. We need to do it operationally through merchandising, not through throwing more locks and more glass and more former law enforcement officers, right? There's going to be a place for that, for investigating crimes that do happen, but let's start thinking about how do we address shrink by providing a better customer experience, all the while saving labor and making our stores more efficient.
Yeah, and I mean, and for me, the takeaway is comes back to that money ball, right? I mean, it comes down to that concept of the Oakland A's. It was foreign, and in fact, it was laughable that was going to be the approach. There was a lot of backlash, and the entire industry in baseball and in sport has moved to some form, or if not almost form of totality of that model.
Yeah.
So it comes down to the numbers support this. The numbers show this. I would challenge that if I went to Home Depot and bought a drill, my experience is not negated because I didn't get to carry it to the cash. If I can keep my arms free and I can buy some accessories, then I take those accessories and I buy it. But it really does come down to challenging ourselves to think there's no 100% this is the way that retail has to be. It's evolved a lot in 100 years from general store to where we are today. There needs to be a new evolution that happens, and this is going to be a fairly demonstrable change that we see, and we're seeing it already with new store, modern store, future builds that we're doing. People are catching on with this process.
Yeah, and like you said, the money ball's key. It's about the data, but it's also about getting more out of less. We talked about the trouble staffing stores. Oakland A's were able to win with a lot less resources than a lot of the bigger organizations, right? So it's huge. That money ball is a fantastic analogy in multiple facets.
Cool, I love it. Well, thanks, Matt. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, no, thanks for the chat, and thanks Conversation on Retail. This is a great platform you guys have for, thinking about shrink in a different way, and excited to be part of the community.